I want you to think about your bedside table right now. Like really picture it in your mind.
Oh yeah, we all have that exact same setup.
Right. If you are anything like the rest of us, there is this very specific, somewhat chaotic piece of modern art living right next to your lamp.
The tangled web of charging cables.
Exactly.
Okay.
It is just a tangle of white cables, maybe a little magnetic charging puck, some specific plastic stand you bought online.
Yep.
And every single night, you go through the exact same ritual. You take off your smartwatch, you carefully align it with its charger, and you hover over it for a second.
Just to make sure that little green charging icon actually pops up on the screen?
Yes. You have to verify it.
Yeah.
And only then do you actually go to sleep. Because if you forget...
Oh, it's the worst.
If you fall asleep on the couch, or, I don't know, you just miss the magnetic connection by a millimeter, you wake up to a completely useless piece of black glass strapped to your wrist for the rest of the day.
And it is a universally frustrating experience.
It really is. But reading through the materials for today's deep dive, there's a truly brilliant phrase used to describe this exact situation. The documentation calls this nightly routine the Stockholm Syndrome of the tech world.
That is such a perfect way to put it.
Isn't it? We have just accepted it. We've totally surrendered to the fact that to have the privilege of wearing a smart device, we must be tethered to a wall outlet every 24 hours.
It really highlights a remarkable psychological phenomenon in consumer electronics, you know? We have entirely normalized a clear technological limitation.
I mean, we really have.
Think about it. When a smartwatch dies at 2 in the afternoon, the user almost always feels a sense of personal failure.
Like it's my fault.
Exactly. You think, I should have charged it rather than, this piece of hardware is failing to meet the demands of a normal human day. We treat battery anxiety as a personal responsibility rather than a fundamental flaw in the engineering.
That is such a profound way to look at it. We blame ourselves for the device's shortcomings. But today, we're going to look at how that entirely accepted reality might have just been shattered.
And it's about time.
Seriously. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore an incredibly fascinating announcement out of the MWC 2026 conference. We have been poring over the details of a release titled Xiaomi Watch 5, the Silicon Carbon Battery Revolution.
A very bold title.
Very bold. We are going to dig into how this single piece of hardware might have just permanently rewritten our expectations for what wearable technology is actually supposed to do for you.
And how it completely upends that Stockholm Syndrome we were just talking about.
Exactly.
And it is a pivotal moment to analyze because the claims being made in these MWC announcements aren't just your standard incremental year-over-year updates.
It's not just a software tweak.
Not at all. We aren't talking about a screen that is 10% brighter or a processor that is a fraction of a second faster. These materials point to a fundamental leap in how we actually power the devices we wear on our bodies.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the specifications on this sheet honestly look like a typo.
They really do.
Let's ground this in reality for a second. When we talk about smartwatch battery life today, what is the current gold standard? I mean, you hope for a full day.
That's the baseline expectation, yeah.
Right. You wake up at 100% and you hope it makes it to bedtime. Maybe if you are incredibly lucky or have a very specific basic device, you get 2 days.
But if you want to stretch a modern, fully featured smartwatch to 3 days, you are making massive compromises.
Oh, huge compromises. You are turning off the always-on display.
You're disabling the continuous heart rate monitor.
Yeah, you are essentially turning your expensive state-of-the-art smartwatch back into a regular dumb watch just to keep the battery from draining to zero.
Because the industry standard has always been a strict compromise between capability and longevity. Every single time a manufacturer adds a new sensor or a brighter screen, they are borrowing from that very limited 24-hour power budget.
It's a zero-sum game.
Exactly. You are always trading functionality for the ability to just keep the watch alive.
Which is why the standout statistic from this Xiaomi Watch 5 announcement completely stopped me in my tracks. It ignores that compromise entirely. The claim here is 6 days.
6 days.
A massive 6-day battery life. And to be absolutely clear, because this is the detail that I actually had to read twice, this is not in some ultra power-saving, low-brightness, bare minimum mode.
No, it's not.
The announcement explicitly states this is 6 days in full smart mode.
Yeah.
Every sensor is running. The screen is doing its thing. The connection to your phone is active. everything.
And the initial reaction from anyone who follows consumer technology to a claim like that is profound skepticism.
Oh, totally. You assume it's a gimmick.
Right, because we are so deeply conditioned to the 24-hour charging cycle that 6 days in full smart mode sounds like aggressive marketing spin.
But it's not.
No. Digging into the underlying technology they are presenting, this isn't some clever software trick or a background task management algorithm. It is a fundamental shift in the physical chemistry of the battery itself.
The physical chemistry.
Yes. The documentation specifically highlights that they have transitioned away from standard lithium-ion to silicon-carbon batteries.
Silicon-carbon. That phrase jumped off the page for me because it isn't exactly an unknown term if you happen to follow the automotive industry.
What's fascinating here is that if that phrase sounds familiar to you, there is a very good reason for it. It is the exact same battery chemistry that the electric vehicle industry has been pouring billions of dollars into developing.
Billions.
For years, EV manufacturers have been desperately chasing silicon-carbon chemistry because it solves the single biggest bottleneck with traditional batteries.
Which is raw capacity, right?
Exactly. Raw capacity.
Yeah.
Traditional lithium-ion batteries rely on graphite to hold the lithium ions. The problem is that graphite is structurally limiting.
So how does silicon change that equation? Give me the breakdown of why moving away from graphite to silicon is the holy grail here.
Okay, think of the graphite in a standard battery like a rigid concrete parking garage.
Okay, a parking garage.
It has a very specific, inflexible number of parking spaces for those lithium ions. Once the garage is full, it's full. You cannot force more cars inside without breaking the concrete.
Which you obviously do not want to do in a battery.
Definitely not. Silicon, on the other hand, operates more like a highly expandable balloon.
Oh, I see.
On a molecular level, silicon can absorb and hold significantly more lithium ions than graphite. It literally expands to accommodate them. That means, in the exact same physical space, a silicon-based structure can store a drastically higher amount of energy.
But the challenge with that balloon analogy, as I understand the history of this tech, is that balloons pop.
Right.
If the silicon expands that much to hold the energy, doesn't it structurally degrade?
Mm-hmm.
How on earth do you take the literal volatile driving force behind a massive 2-ton electric car, stabilize it, and put it on a watch?
That is the core of the engineering breakthrough being presented here. Pure silicon does swell and degrade, which is why they use a silicon-carbon composite matrix.
So the carbon is the key.
Yes. The carbon acts as a stabilizing scaffolding, allowing the silicon to expand and contract without destroying the battery. And the true marvel is that they managed to stabilize this and shrink that massive EV technology down for a wearable.
Which is wild.
It is entirely about the density factor. By perfecting this silicon-carbon structure, Xiaomi has achieved a dramatically higher energy density. They can store far more energy in the exact same microscopic physical footprint of a watch battery.
Which brings us to a specific specification in the announcement that is almost hard to wrap your head around if you know smartwatch hardware. They managed to cram a 930 milliamp hour capacity battery into a normal-sized watch casing.
It's massive.
Just to give you listening some context, an average flagship smartwatch from the big players right now usually hovers around the 300 to maybe 400 milliamp hour mark.
If they're lucky.
Yeah. Xiaomi has essentially tripled the raw capacity. Think about your wrist for a second. That is an enormous, unprecedented amount of power sitting in a physical space the size of a few stacked coins.
To put that into perspective, that capacity is staggering for a wearable device. It represents a level of energy density that completely flips the script for software developers and hardware engineers.
Oh, so?
Well, suddenly the hardware can stop worrying exclusively about power conservation and start focusing on power utilization.
Right. They aren't just trying to survive the day anymore.
Exactly. When you have that much overhead, when you jump from 300 to 930 milliamp hours, you can introduce entirely new categories of features that were previously impossible because they simply demanded too much electricity.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because having a watch that lasts for almost a week so you can leave your charger at home during a vacation is incredible.
That alone is a massive selling point.
Right. But what the Xiaomi Watch 5 actually does with that massive reservoir of power feels like something pulled straight out of a science fiction movie. I was reading through the user interface section of the NWC release, and it details how this watch can actually read your muscle signals.
which represents a massive leap forward in user interface design. For the last decade, we have been locked into a paradigm of purely capacitive touch.
Swiping on tiny glass screens.
Right, swiping on glass or pressing physical crowns and buttons.
I need you to explain how this actually functions, because the scenario outlined in the documentation is so incredibly Tony Stark.
It really is.
It says you don't have to raise your wrist awkwardly to your mouth. You don't have to tap the screen with your other hand.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait for a little glowing prompt and then speak into the watch. It says you simply snap your fingers.
Just a snap.
How is a watch reading a finger snap without a camera or a microphone?
It comes down to bioelectricity. Every time you move a muscle, your nervous system sends an electrical impulse to make that contraction happen. A gesture like snapping your fingers requires a very specific, forceful, and unique sequence of muscle contractions in your forearm. Because the watch is strapped directly to your wrist, its sensors are positioned over those muscles and tendons.
So it's literally feeling the electricity in your arm.
Precisely. When you snap, the watch isn't listening for the sound of the snap. It is physically detecting the unique electrical signature of that muscle movement through your skin.
That is wild. It is almost telepathic in how it is described in the user experience notes.
It feels like magic.
Picture yourself walking down the street. You're carrying a heavy bag of groceries in one hand and you're holding a coffee in the other.
A very common scenario.
And you realize you need to send an email or check your schedule. Right now, you would have to put something down to free up a hand to poke at a tiny glass screen.
Or try to use your nose.
Right. We've all been there. But with this, you just snap the fingers of the hand that is wearing the watch. That physical, localized gesture triggers the sensors, and suddenly you are talking directly to Google Gemini.
The seamlessness of that interaction cannot be overstated. By reading the biosignals of the muscle movement itself, the watch completely bypasses the traditional physical interface. It removes the friction between human intent and digital execution.
But I have to ask the obvious question here. If this watch is constantly reading my bioelectrical signals, waiting for me to snap my fingers, and then instantly booting up a highly advanced generative AI like Google Gemini to draft emails or pull up recipes,
Well, let me guess.
wouldn't that just absolutely murder the battery?
That is the exact question every engineer in the industry would ask, and it brings us perfectly back to the battery breakthrough we were just discussing.
Ah, right. The 930 milliamp hours.
Exactly. Running an advanced generative AI model like Google Gemini, even if the heavy lifting is done in the cloud and the watch is just maintaining the rapid, high bandwidth connection required to interface with it, that demands an incredible amount of processing power and energy.
Plus the energy required to have biometric sensors constantly scanning your forearm for electrical impulses.
Precisely the point. The sensors required to accurately read those muscle signals cannot afford to go to sleep. They must be active, sampling continuously at a very high rate to catch that snap gesture the exact millisecond it happens.
They have to be always listening, basically.
Always feeling. If you tried to put that kind of continuous biometric sampling coupled with instant AI integration into last year's standard smartwatch,
It would be dead before you even made it to your morning commute.
it wouldn't just drain the battery in a matter of hours. The processor strain would likely cause the watch to physically overheat on your wrist.
Wow.
That is why that 930 milliamp hour silicon carbon battery is the absolute foundation of this entire device. The Tony Stark Snap to Gemini feature simply wouldn't exist without the underlying chemistry revolution. The EV grade density is the only thing that buys them the massive power budget required to innovate on the interface.
It is the perfect marriage of raw brute force power enabling science fiction features.
Yeah.
The battery is the enabler for the magic. And usually in the consumer tech space, when you hear about a device that takes literal electric vehicle battery technology, shrinks it down to an unprecedented density, gives you almost a week of full smart mode life, and lets you summon an advanced AI just by snapping your fingers, you immediately brace yourself for the price.
You really do. You are conditioned to expect a massive premium price tag for premium, bleeding-edge innovation.
You expect it to cost as much as a high-end smartphone. You figure they're going to charge $800 or $900 for this level of hardware. But the MWC announcement drops one final massive surprise on us.
Best surprise in the document, really.
The retail price for the Xiaomi Watch 5 is set at only €299.
When you look at the broader context of the wearable market, that number is perhaps the most disruptive piece of information in the entire announcement.
So what does this all mean? When you take a device with these incredibly high-end, virtually unheard-of battery specifications and a futuristic AI interface, and you drop it into the global market at 299 euros, what happens to everyone else?
It creates an absolute shockwave. If we analyze the competitive landscape mentioned in the industry, reactions to this source material, you start to see the immediate existential threat to the established titans of the industry.
They must be panicking.
At 299 euros, Xiaomi is drastically undercutting the current iterations of the Galaxy Watch.
And it isn't just a matter of undercutting them on the price tag. It is wildly over-delivering on the actual hardware.
Totally.
Think about the consumer standing in a store. On one hand, you have the established brands offering a watch that lasts maybe 24 hours using the same tap-and-swipe interface we've had for a decade, and they want 400 or 500 euros for it.
Right.
On the other hand, you have EV battery tech, a 6-day lifespan, and muscle-reading AI for $299 count. It is a completely lopsided comparison based on these numbers.
This market disruption forces a fundamental reckoning for competitors. If these 6-day battery statistics hold up in real-world independent reviews,
Which they should.
and there is no reason to believe they won't, given the silicon-carbon chemistry, the dynamic of the entire smartwatch market shifts overnight. The industry analysis specifically notes that devices like the Pixel Watch, which have historically struggled with battery life even in their standard modes, are going to be in an incredibly precarious position.
You really have to feel a twinge of sympathy for the engineering and marketing teams over at those other companies right now. You have spent years fine-tuning your standard lithium-ion devices, trying to squeeze an extra hour of life out of them, and suddenly the baseline is reset to 6 days at a fraction of your price.
It effectively ends the era of incremental updates. A manufacturer can no longer confidently step onto a stage next year, announce a new watch with a slightly brighter screen and a 24-hour battery, and expect consumers to pay a premium.
They'd be laughed off the stage.
Exactly. The 299 euro price point for EV-grade silicon-carbon technology and muscle-reading AI integration permanently resets the baseline for what consumers will demand. The market now knows that a 6-day battery is physically possible and financially accessible.
It is going to be incredibly fascinating to watch the heavyweights scramble to catch up to this new reality. They were going to have to pivot their entire supply chains towards silicon carbon just to stay relevant in the conversation.
To synthesize the magnitude of what we have explored in this deep dive, we are looking at a clear, undeniable paradigm shift in wearable technology.
We really are.
We are moving out of a long period of stagnation and accepted limitations and stepping into an era where EV-grade silicon-carbon chemistry can deliver 930 milliamp hours of raw power directly to your wrist.
It's just massive.
That unprecedented power is what enables the staggering 6 days of battery life. And more importantly, it provides the massive energy overhead required to run continuous high-draw biometric systems for futuristic, finger-snapping AI interactions with tools like Google Gemini.
And doing it all on a budget.
Right. Executing all of this for a highly disruptive 299 euros challenges the very economic and technological foundation of the current smartwatch industry.
And for you, listening right now, why this deep dive truly matters is because it represents a real light at the end of the tunnel for how you interact with your devices. It represents the potential end of battery anxiety.
Finally.
It means the death of that Stockholm syndrome we talked about at the very beginning of the show. You might very soon be looking at a much smarter, seamlessly integrated wearable experience that actually respects your wallet and, far more importantly, respects your time by not forcing you to tie your life to a wall outlet every single night.
It completely reframes the relationship the user has with the hardware, moving it from a needy device to an invisible assistant.
I love that, an invisible assistant.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises an important question to consider regarding the interface itself.
Okay.
If our devices can now physically feel our intent through something as subtle as the bioelectrical muscle signals required for a finger snap, what other invisible physical gestures will become the new interface? Will the very act of tapping and swiping our fingers across tiny, smudged glass screens soon feel as outdated, cumbersome, and primitive to us as dialing a rotary phone?
Wow. That is a wild thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Xiaomi Watch 5 and the silicon carbon revolution. We will catch you next time as we continue to explore the ideas and technologies that are actively shaping our world. Have a great one.